Demons of the Flesh, The Complete Guide to Left-Hand Path Sex Magic by Nikolas and Zeena Shreck. Let's talk about the most mysterious subject of all, sex. Sex is an electromagnetic phenomenon. William S. Burroughs. Desire is the great force. Andre Breton. The eternal feminine draws us onwards by Dr. Faust in Goethe's Faust II. Foreplay. The book before you is a guide in the sense that it will escort you on a journey. The route we will be taking passes through vistas of strange beauty and across perilous chasms. It is known as the left-hand path. Few have traveled this road, and fewer still have reached its final distant destination. Unfortunately, most previously available maps of this mysterious terrain have been drafted by those who have never even stepped upon the path. Yet they'll warn you of the terrible dangers confronted along the way, suggesting that its arduous passage only lead to the darkest of dead ends. Such faulty cartographers will caution you that the only souls to be encountered on this ill-lit thoroughfare are fools, lunatics, scoundrels, and thieves. Indeed, there may be some truth to that last admonition, but the born adventurer will not be dissuaded so easily. There are other maps offered by slightly less timid souls that bear a closer semblance to reality. However, these guides breezily point out only the most comforting tourist attractions on the sightseeing itinerary. All dark alleys, disroutable neighborhoods, and red light districts are kept safely out of view, deemed unfit for public consumption. Such squeamishness permits the explorer only a carefully expurgated outlook. Furthermore, the specifications found on this sort of map are frequently so convoluted that the traveler doesn't know which end is up. Finally, there's the map drafted by those who declare themselves not only as tour guides, but proudly lay claim to this left-turning way in its entirety, hailing it as the very best place to be. However, should the unwary wayfarer consult such maps for even the simplest directions, it immediately becomes apparent that there's been some confusion. This mix-up, it seems, is due to a simple but enduring misappropriation of nomenclature. The area on these maps marked so conspicuously as the left-hand path turns out, on closer inspection, to be a different path altogether. Demons of the Flesh, designed in part as a corrective to the false leads and detours described above, charts this hitherto misinterpreted path from a very different perspective. On our map, we clearly show you the complete road plan in all of its three-dimensional topography and complexity, starting from its remote ancient eastern point of origination. We have also broken beneath the visible surface of this causeway to reveal the hidden archaeological layers of this sinister current as it has coursed through time. Accompanying you through this voyage, we provide practical suggestions for navigating the leftward road in a contemporary Western world that provides no reliable compass. But enough metaphors about maps and paths. Let's face it, you picked up this book to read about sex. And there's certainly plenty of sex to be found in these pages, chronicling an infinite diversity of erotic experience. From the alchemy of menstrual blood and semen to the ritual worship of the vagina, sex with promiscuous monks and sacred whores, from Tibet to Babylon, necrophiliac sex in cremation grounds, corpophiliac sex in Sicily, incestuous sex in India, vampiric sex in China, the orgasm as sacrifice, the orgasm prolonged, sex with goddesses, psychic transsexualism, sex with disembodied beings, sexual slavery, sexual mastery, sexual trance, ancient Egyptian anal sex between Set and his nephew Horus, oral sex, autoerotic sex, group sex, telepathic sex, all kinds of sex sexed, tantric sex, Gnostic sex, satanic sex, sex with young virgins, sex with the elderly, sex with the wives of other men, even sex with Jesus. However, the multi-bodied panorama of polymorphous delight that seeps from this book is not presented merely to stimulate the jaded or to dilate ennuyé voluptuaries with novel deviations they have yet to try out. It's important to establish that there is a significant difference between the profound pleasure of sexuality enjoyed for its own sake as a physiological and aesthetic experience and sexuality utilized for authentic magical or initiatory purposes, the nucleus of the left-hand path. Taken out of their proper context, the outwardly salacious tidbits pressed between these pages can, and probably will, be misinterpreted if this distinction is not taken into account. At the same time, it must be pointed out that the whole topic of sexual magic has been hedged about with a tremendous amount of hypocrisy, emanating both from practicing sex magicians and those merely observing their activities. For instance, many a curiosity seeker has casually poked around the most superficial level of erotic magic, hoping to learn a few sex tips to spice up a lackluster love life. For the most part, this misguided playing at sex is merely a waste of time, generating little in the way of physical excitement and absolutely nothing in the way of magic. But some self-righteous sex magicians have taken the schoolmarmish position that this fairly common phenomenon is immoral or spiritually harmful, or even that sex magic must be performed without a scintilla of lust or emotion to be legitimate. Conversely, the non-magician may snicker at the whole idea of erotic magic, dismissing it as some sort of a dirty joke, refusing to accept that sex magicians are doing anything more profound than satiating their ordinary carnal appetites under the guise of esoteric doctrine. Behind these sanctimonious attitudes lays the horrific banality to which Eros has been reduced in the modern Western world. In this spirit, some of our readers might imagine that a guide to left-hand path sex magic will provide the furtive cheap thrills of thinly veiled pornography. Literally speaking, that much maligned word pornography, from the Greek porno meaning whore and graphia meaning writing, simply means to write about whores. So for those of you who were fervently hoping that this book would be pornographic, there is indeed enough writing about whores in these pages to technically qualify. Of course, the whores we will be concerned with are the conveyors of that long-lost ars amatoria of sacred prostitution. If prostitution once served a noble and even sacred function, then why not a sacred pornography? Such a form would be something far more subversive and powerful than the formulaic repetition of conventions we usually associate with the genre. The British author Angela Carter, whose cruel tales were usually tinged with an unsettling and surreal sexuality, once suggested the possibilities. The moral pornographer would be an artist who uses pornographic material as a part of the acceptance of the logic of a world of absolute sexual license for all the genders, and projects a model of the way such a world might work. His business would be the total demystification of the flesh and the subsequent revelation, through the infinite modulations of the sexual act. The pornographer has it in his power to become a terrorist of the imagination, a sexual gorilla, whose purpose is to overturn our most basic notions of these relations, to reinstate sexuality as a primary mode of being rather than a specialized area of vacation from being, and to show that the everyday meetings in the marriage bed are parodies of their own pretensions. In many ways, Carter's description of the taboo overturning sexual gorilla who totally demystifies the flesh makes for an excellent introduction to the work of the left-hand path sex magician that this book illustrates. For the magi of the left-hand path, sexuality is even more than a primary mode of being. The altered state of extreme erotic ecstasy is a potentially divine mode of being, the chaotic dance of two magnetically attracted opposite energies that allows for the creation of a third power transcending the human. The couple that unleashes this hidden, psychically remanifesting power of the left-hand path within their orgasm-yoked organisms to its full intensity will find it difficult to return to the pre-programmed existence they once led. The man and woman who even once taste the freedom of the left-hand path, as expressed through its self-deifying sexual rites, have exited the human game as it is normally played. If the left-hand path is dangerous, a point both its detractors and its advocates have agreed upon, one of its primary hazards is the peril of freedom in a world almost instinctively committed to crushing liberty in whatever form it might appear. All autocracies have held sway by severely curbing the full development of sexual power in their subjects. The left-hand path, a method of consciously activating levels of erotic energy almost unknown in conventional sexual relations, must be viewed as a threat to any hierarchy that seeks to bridle the development of man into God. The sexual gnosis of the left-hand path has the potential to forge heroic, self-determined individuals from the bleeding meat of the human herd. The eccentric, some would say insane, psychologist Wilhelm Reich's researches into the untapped mysteries of the orgasm on human consciousness partially accord with the ancient teachings of the left-hand path. In his The Mass Psychology of Fascism, Reich recognized the threat that total erotic freedom would pose to any societal control mechanism. In unconscious keeping with the left-hand path veneration of Shakti, the divine sexual power of woman, he wrote, sexually awakened women, affirmed and recognized as such, would mean the complete collapse of the authoritarian ideology. George Orwell, in his dystopic novel 1984, which remains an acute diagnosis for the modern cult of control, also understood that the limitation of sexual power was one of the most insidious weapons of autocracy. Orwell, as Julia, the heroine of 1984, realized the secret of Eros. Unlike Winston, she had grasped the inner meaning of the party's sexual puritanism. It was not merely that the sex instinct created a world of its own which was outside the party's control, and which therefore had to be destroyed if possible. What was more important was that sexual privation induced hysteria, which was desirable because it could be transformed into war fever and leader worship. The adept of the left-hand path radically individuated and separated from the delusions of the crowd through systematic transgression of taboo and transcendent sexualities, world of its own, is unlikely to be swept up in the unthinking passions of the masses. In the first historical manifestations of the sinister current that we will investigate, the Vamamarga of India, this element of social defiance becomes evident. The Indian left-hand path initiate's refusal to follow his or her society's religious restrictions against sex between the caste, the drinking of wine, the consumption of certain impure foods, is the foundation upon which he or she eventually transgresses the human state and becomes divine. In more extreme left-hand path sects, such as the Agori, the transcendence of deeply seated internal taboos goes much further. Although this critical factor of societal subversion has been either ignored or whitewashed by more temperate interpreters of the left-hand path than ourselves. You will find that this refusal to play by the rules dictated by others is one of the universally definitive factors separating the left-hand path from milder, less antagonistic forms of sex magic. It would be easy to misinterpret this defiance of social and religious custom as a purely political statement. However, once freed from this set of psychic blinkers, the left-hand path magician does not simply trade them in for a new set. He or she strives to reach a state of mind in which all forms of orthodoxy must be questioned and rejected. Even at this early stage, the perceptive reader will have realized that when we speak of left-hand sex magic, we are not concerned solely with the workings of the genitalia for some sorcerous purpose. Yes, its central tool of illumination is awakened sexuality, but the left-hand path tradition actually provides an approach to every aspect of existence, a philosophy or love of Sophia. That set into action can transform the entirety of the human psychobiological structure, not just his or her penis or vagina. One might say that left-hand path sex magic is a form of initiation consciously designed for a hopelessly fucked up world. The left-hand path philosophy posists that it is the method best suited for the apocalyptic and out-of-kilter times in which mankind currently exists, an era the traditional Indian left-hand path discipline recognizes as the Kali Yuga. Exceptional measures are needed to awaken to full consciousness under such inauspicious conditions. Step 1 is to reject the sorrow and despair such times may inspire, and joyfully embrace the chaos of the disintegrating world. This shimmering and illusory spectacle that emanates from the vulva of Dark Kali. And one of the greatest tools of transformation over which Kali presides is the flesh, especially as it is subjected to the flame of desire. Outside of the left-hand path tradition, proper pre-Christian antiquity clearly acknowledged that the transformative and uncanny states of mind attainable through sexuality partake of the realm of the gods. In fact, many common terms denoting sexuality in modern language still bear the indelible traces of that ancient appreciation of the magical, even religious nature of human sexuality. The erotic harkens back to the god Eros. Aphrodisiac refers to the goddess Aphrodite, just as venereal is derived from Venus. The magical origins of the word fetish are also fairly well known. It derives from the Portuguese feitiço, for sorcery or charm. Who can deny that the powerful hold in which a sexual fetish enthralls the fetishist is anything but a fascination, a glamour, entirely magical in nature? The left-hand path, in all of its forms, consciously returns Eros to the formerly exalted place it once held in human life, recognizing the dormant divinity of sex even in practices recoiled from as sordid and shameful by the profane. Underneath its sometimes contradictory examination of sex magical symbols and premises from various cultural and religious traditions, Demons of the Flesh postulates a universal biological phenomenon seemingly hardwired into human consciousness and sexuality. As we shall see, the Indian Tantric phrase left-hand path describes this psychosexual anomaly with great precision. However, we also use the phrase sinister current, which indicates its non-indigenous, omnipresent existence, not only in a specific cultural tradition, but as a force located in the body itself. We've now indicated how central a role sex plays to the left-hand path, but presumably you may be wondering where the magic referred to in the subtitle of this book comes in. Just as the godlike power inherent in sexual pleasure has been diminished to its currently debased state, so has the once royal art of magic suffered a similar decline in the modern world. If one does not immediately associate the word with show business trickery and prestidigitation, then it conjures up the vulgar consumer occultist dressed up in the obligatory magic robe, credulously reciting doctrinaire magic spells, usually hoping in vain to summon up the money he or she lacks the skills to earn, or to attract a given object of desire without acquiring the social graces to even strike up a conversation. In other words, magic, at least in the Western world, has become an exotic plaything for losers. The acting out of delusive, wishful thinking to achieve transient goals more efficiently, realized through the mundane development of personal competence. Magic, from the left-hand path perspective outlined here, is far removed from the crude commodity it has become in the modern occult milieu. We are focused here on the great work, the sex alchemical transformation of human to demi-divinity, not the development of a few parlor tricks. In the Indian left-hand path, the greatest magicians are the divya or the bodhisattva, who need not resort to anything resembling a ritual to create radical transformation of Maya, the substance of which mind and matter are both composed. Magical powers, as understood in the West, are sometimes a consequence of erotic initiation, but they are secondary to the radical remanifestation of self to higher modes of being, which is the raison d'etre of the left-hand path. In the ancient Hellenic and Gnostic traditions, we will also consider as expressions of the sinister current, a divya is known as a magus, a being whose magical power is based on the internal cultivation of the self to demonic levels of consciousness. As this state of being is the goal of all sinister current sex magicians, we do not provide the reader with presto changeo spells, curses, or scripted rituals. We also don't furnish you with the names of demons guaranteed to fulfill your every command, nor surefire charms that will snare the targets of your lust. If you're gullible enough to be searching for such instant panaceas, our emphasis on the importance of self-directed magical work as an internal process of self-deification will probably be extremely frustrating. This book will make clear the perennial left-hand path methods that activate the eternal course of development taken by the divya or the magus of the left-hand path, but it deliberately refrains from leading the reader mechanically through a checklist of external gimmickry. You won't find anything like 1. Open vagina. 2. Insert penis. 3. Say the magic word with conviction. That sort of thing is useless, not to say an insult to the budding magician. Dogmatic instructions, to our experience, cannot make for great magicians. They only prove that the reader can obediently follow commands. Such shortcuts and simplifications provide none of the necessary friction for the student of the left-hand path, without which none of the abrasive effort required to initiate oneself can be sparked. Demons of the Flesh, which we are immodest enough to classify as a tantra for the 21st century, is constructed to provide this friction, rather than to distill the left-hand path into an easy-to-swallow mother's milk for the suckling. For this reason, although practical methods of procedures are suggested, this is not so much a how-to book. Its focus is on why to. In our opinion, one mark of the true left-hand path magician is an ability to integrate complex symbolic systems synthesize them with personal experience, and create from this synthesis his or her own unique direction on the left-hand path. We place left-hand sex magic in a historical context by analyzing some of the colorful historical figures who have practiced orgasmic thaumaturgy in the modern West. But we must make clear that it is not our intention to inspire our readers to emulate the lives and legends of these individuals. The left-hand path is firmly focused on self-deification, the Fanish idolization and hero worship inculcated by so much occult literature for the all-stars of yesteryear is wholly out of place with the goals of the left-hand path. If there is an appropriate left-hand path attitude to be taken with the famous and infamous sex magical teachers of the past, it is surely irreverence, not pious sanctification. In fact, the process of transforming yourself from human to divine consciousness through erotic initiation, a healthy irreverence directed at your own pretensions, is mandatory. The world is filled with people who have devoured 1,000 magical books and have never performed a single genuine act of magic. So prevalent is this phenomenon that the syndrome has even earned itself a name: the armchair magician. It is certainly not our intention to breathe through this book something even worse: the bedside sex magician. Assuming that you are reading this as an introductory overview of left-hand path sex magic and not simply as a perverse amusement, the principles outlined herein should be enacted in your own flesh, through action in the real world as opposed to cerebral abstraction. Of course, there have been other books that have attempted to communicate something of the mysteries of sex magic. However, from our point of view, the majority of these earlier volumes have missed the mark. We would like to think that our aim will be more precise. For the most part, previously available sex magic texts have softened the piercing power available to the erotic magician into an ooey, gooey froth of insipid romanticism. Most recent offerings have been geared towards the weak, sniveling sensibilities of the so-called New Age movement. Such faint-hearted guides have proffered an utterly defanged and domesticated sexual magic to their readers. This volume will sit uneasily on the shelf with those gentler, less direct works. If your understanding of sex magic has been gleaned only from that unsound body of work, we hope that this book serves as a purging antidote to previous misconceptions. Not the least of the misconceptions we have targeted is the entirely incoherent and historically invalid understanding of the exact nature of the left-hand path that has prevailed for the past century or so in the Western world. One of the challenges in writing this book was to properly define a subject which so many already think they understand, but in fact do not. At least, not by any objective standard we can identify in attempting to set the record straight on what the left-hand path is. We are only beginning the greater task of establishing a congruous working model of the sinister current in the West. Built, as it must be, upon the ruins of the confusion of the past, the working model may well take another 50 to 100 years to truly take hold. Although we ourselves are practicing left-hand path sex magicians, this book is in no sense designed as a medium of conversion or as a recruitment device. As we will make clear, the left-hand path is, for all of its anti-authoritarian elements, very much an elitist form of initiation. By this, we do not mean that the left-hand path adepts necessarily consider themselves to be superior to the uninitiated, only that the sinister current is not for all, and can never be a path for the millions. Reading this book may well clarify for you that you would be ill-suited for this school of initiation. Sexuality is the expression in the material world of the metaphysical concept of polarity, the yin and yang, Shiva and Shakti, the rose and the cross, the union and transcendence of opposites. Demons of the flesh is the very thing it describes, and that it can be understood as a sex magic working in its own right. As a brainchild created by the polarized erotic energies of male and female sexuality generated by its authors, this book illustrates how the combined sexual force of two magicians can create a demonic third entity. By shaping the collaborative words and perspectives of two magicians into a cohesive whole, we have aimed to bring into it being a magical element that takes on a certain life of its own, independent of its creators. Whenever two magicians work together, the creation of such an elemental force is the result. William S. Burroughs and Brian Gisson refer to this phenomenon as the third mind. Just as left-hand path erotic magic creates a numinous space in which the very different energies of male and female can communicate and see beyond the limits of gender, so does the twofold voice of this book speak from a viewpoint that transcends male and female.
This concludes the foreplay of Demons of the Flesh. If you've liked what you've heard today, please like and subscribe.